So I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with the schedule changes, but these are what they are. And the most exciting, and I think everybody is aware, that we're moving to give HPV vaccine to boys and girls from 1st of January next year. And we're shifting from HPV 4 to HPV 9. So that's the major big change. The next major big change is finally, after many years of New Zealand advocating for it and recommending it, finally we have got approval to start varicella vaccination program next year. So those are the two big changes. The smaller changes are we keep flip-flopping with which pneumococcal vaccine we're using. So we are shifting back to pneumococcal 10 from 13. So I'll make a few comments to you guys about the difference. Overall, conjugate pneumococcal vaccines are all bloody good. There are some small differences between them. So really it's about PHARMAC's decision purchasing, really the difference between the two. We're changing the HIB brand, which is neither here nor there because they all work the same. So I won't really discuss that anymore, except HIB will look slightly different in the fridges. The rotavirus, I'll touch on slightly, that we're changing the type of rotavirus vaccine we use. Now, once again, the two rotavirus vaccines on the world market act very similarly. So there's not a lot of difference between them that anyone can tell. The advantage of going to the new rotavirus brand is we've got a 2-dose schedule, so that's cool. And then the brand of MMR is changing. Once again, it'll just look different in the fridges. So if you're used to colour coding in your fridges, you just have to remember that it's going to look a little different. So those are the major ones. So I'm going to touch on HPV and varicella mostly, okay? Now, HPV vaccination is actually an incredible story. The HPV vaccine is very like the design of hepatitis B vaccine, very similar vaccine, and it's acting in a very similar way to hepatitis B. So far to date, it's shown great effectiveness and an excellent safety profile. Despite that, it's got a lot of mumblings in the social media at the moment, huge amount of mumblings in the social media. And so what I handed out with this today, there's just a summary on HPV vaccines for you guys. Did that get handed out too? Did we? Oh, okay, I sent it through to Merrin, so I'll ask her to copy it. If we could ask Merrin, I did send her a copy of that as well. I've got a copy here if she hasn't got it. Oh. It's an academic article. It was just, okay. No, I've left it behind. Okay. It's a summary article just because there's a lot of talk on the social media about it. Now, to be honest, I think that's nothing to do with the HPV vaccine. I think that's to do with vaccinating teenagers. I think when you vaccinate teenagers, things happen to teenagers. And we've seen this before. In the French-speaking countries years ago, they introduced hepatitis B vaccine initially to teenagers, and they decided there was an association with multiple sclerosis. Sort of a similar sort of thing, because funny things happen in teenage years. And if you're doing a large mass vaccination campaign, you're going to get a lot of coincidental events. So for a long time, the Francophone countries thought hepatitis B was associated with multiple sclerosis, which it's not, But it created the same sort of myth that the English-speaking countries had when we think MMR is associated with. See, everyone in the room knows that, eh? See, it gets stuck in our heads. So my worry about HPV vaccine is I'm not actually worried about its safety profile. I'm worried that we will embed some new myths and that we will end up in the same position we were with MMR for years and years and years, where you're still getting people coming in saying, hey, I'm worried about autism. You can't undo a myth. So the more we start talking about the myths, I think the more we embed them. It's like where there's smoke, there's fire. So my problem for HPV is being aware that we're vaccinating teenagers. And so the advantage of vaccinating, I think, at the younger ages will actually help. Because, teenagers are a vulnerable period of life for a whole lot of emotional and physical reasons. Did she have it?
I've left her a message.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. There's a whole lot of emotional and physical reasons around teenagers. So the things people associate with HPV, and these do not get embedded in your head as myths, are things like regional pain, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. You could sort of bet on it, eh? And a funny thing called POTS, which is positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. I think it's kids who get fast heart rates and fall over, And the sort of strange things that happen with growing teenagers. They're hard things to diagnose because they're not always a single diagnostic code. So they're very hard to come back and say, you've generated a hypothesis and I've proved it wrong, because it's actually quite hard to know what the diagnosis is. So I reflect that to you folks, because have you guys seen this out there in the social media? Lots, yeah, lots and lots. So I reflect that out to us because the science does not match the conversations in the social media in any way. And the science is actually trying very hard to figure out what the hell POTS is and how we could measure it. And the Japanese in particular have been hit by this concept of regional pain, and their vaccination programs dropped away to less than 1%. It's extraordinary, isn't it? And yet nobody can see any association with regional pain. So the problem is we talk up these myths, where there's smoke, there's fire. And it's not that the scientific community isn't looking to check they haven't got it wrong, but it seems extremely unlikely. So if we go out there into press conferences and start talking about it, it'll become autism all over again. Okay, so I think that's the real problem for HPV. The other side though, HPV is amazing. This vaccine's incredible. So there's loads and loads of different types of HPV, and about 12 of them are oncogenic, okay? So really the major targets are about those 12, but of course the first type 4 had 2 oncogenic and 2 non-oncogenic in it. Yep, so what are the 2 non-oncogenic doing in Gardasil? What are they acting against? So the 2 oncogenic against cervical cancer, what are the other 2 doing? Warts, genital warts, yeah, so genital warts aren't oncogenic, okay? So Gardasil had this smart idea of putting 2 non-oncogenic in there as well, because there's another type 2 vaccine on the world market that's got the 2 oncogenic types in it, 16 and 18, but doesn't have the genital warts type in it. And that's called Cervarix. I think it is licensed in New Zealand, but never been used here. So HPV is interesting. Most of us clear HPV. We usually get immunity from it, but not always. And the reason for knowing that is that if it comes to using a vaccine, you want to use a vaccine before you've got an immune response. So there is still some ongoing discussions about the role of these vaccines with older people. If we've been exposed, and if we've exposed, have we already had an immune response? So there's a bit of conversation around that. HPV-4 covers about 70%, I think everyone knows this. Now the new one, HPV-9, we're probably getting about another 17% coverage of oncogenic types. It's quite a lot more. So type 16 is the major one, type 18 is the second major. So that's the major one, that's the second major one, and now we've got all these extra dudes in there as well. So should help. It's still pretty new, HPV-9, okay, it was first licensed in the States in 2014 and in Europe in 2015. So it's very like the pneumococcal vaccines. It's the same as HPV-4, it's got everything else in it, but it's got more serotypes, okay? So that's 4 and that's 9. I just stick that in there because if somebody's going to ask you what else is in it, those are the other things in it, and here's the list. Somebody was making a play about polysorbate making you infertile for a while. Years and years ago there was this great big billboard in central Auckland. I should have brought it along, it's very cool. This gorgeous looking girl and, you know, will your daughter become infertile? And it's because there was polysorbate in this vaccine. There is also polysorbate in ice cream, okay? Particularly apparently diet ice cream. So if you don't want your daughter to be infertile, you better stop all ice creams. You know, this is the thing about small amounts of these things are neither here nor there, and large amounts of water could kill you. So this is the challenge always with the myths around these things. Okay, so this is the problem nowadays, cervical cancer, but not just cervical cancer we're looking at now. Okay, so we're looking at other ones. Oropharyngeal. I Googled, never do this. I Googled cancers of the penis. I was ill for about 3 hours. Unbelievable. Does this come back to the Viagra conversation? It was so bad. So this was the most benign picture I could find of cancer of the penis. You know, so if you ever want to know a compelling reason to sell it, just Google cancer of the penis. Oh my God. It was so bad. So vulval cancers, okay, they're often overlooked and real nasty. And of course, pediatric HPV cancer of the oropharynx, yeah. So, what are we looking at nowadays? Cervical cancers are the biggie, because they're the big numbers, okay? But, so this is the American data, and we would expect New Zealand data to be pretty similar to American data, okay? So, we're expecting, it really probably is a attributable factor in all cervical cancer. It's just that sometimes when you're looking for it, you can't find it. But it probably has to be there for all cervical cancer. Vulval cancer, over 50% are HPV attributable. Probably 2/3 of vaginal cancer, about 1/3 of penile cancers, almost all anal cancers, interestingly, and 2/3 of oropharyngeal cancers. Yeah, it's sort of interesting, eh? The more you look, the more you find with this little bug. And in particular, this one's a concern. Cancer of the oropharynx have been on the increase dramatically in New Zealand, both boys and girls, but dramatically in men, okay? Now, obviously that's related to sexual habits, but it's really quite a dramatic increase of oropharyngeal cancers, and our ENT colleagues have actually been sort of leading the charge about introducing this vaccine to boys. Okay, so I think that's pretty compelling. Now, there's just a little bit of New Zealand epidemiology. Cervical cancer rates are generally dropping. The screening program's helped, it really has helped, but then they stopped dropping, and we've got quite a marked, much higher for Māori. Now, you often see this, but particularly for cervical cancer, Māori rates are much higher, which is really sad. And we know it's mostly related to HPV 16 and 18. And we've got estimates of how much we could prevent through vaccination. So the world has done modelling about what would work the most effectively. And you've got cervical screening programs and you've got vaccination. Now, obviously, the two together is the best whammy. And New Zealand's in the privileged position that we will continue to have a cervical screening program plus a vaccination campaign. But many developed countries have neither. And so when you model, vaccination is much the best bangs for your bucks. So for example, Papua New Guinea is going to start vaccinating next year. They've got some of the highest cervical cancer rates in the world. It's really horrible. So they're going to start vaccinating next year. And quite a few of the developing countries are getting Gavi funding to try and introduce this vaccine. Because really, it's quite sad. You know, we've got both of them, and the countries out there with much higher rates than ours have got nothing. So the other side of the genital warts protection is the most common STI in New Zealand. And since vaccination programs commenced, we've seen quite a decline, nearly 50% decline in genital warts. So, you know, this is not robust data, but it clearly is having an effect. There's your oropharyngeal cancers. In males is increasing rapidly since 2005. Nearly 12% increase per annum. It's quite amazing, eh? And there's some female increase as well. And so also this is just looking at, have people been exposed and do they have antibodies? So I was just giving that to you for completeness. So this is just to highlight the point about cervical cancer, that we've got really high rates for Māori. And some of that will be because they're missing out on the screening program. In fact, quite a lot of it probably is, and some of it's because differential treatment once they get into the system. Genital warts are dropping, so that's when we introduced Gardasil in 2008, and you know, we haven't had great coverage. Our coverage has been sitting around 50, climbing up to 60%. So it's quite neat to see that we've got quite, you know, starting to see quite good reduction in genital warts. I don't see so much now. Do you guys in general practice? I don't see so many genital warts as I used to. It's not like what you want to see too much, not before morning tea. Yeah. So this is some New Zealand data summarising the number of cases potentially preventable by HPV-9. This is based on 2012 data. So introducing HPV-9, this is roughly the number of cases we think we could prevent per year around each of these. So you can see that cervical is the biggie, but you've still got quite big numbers elsewhere, particularly oropharyngeal. Okay. So, you know, it wasn't the first reason for making this vaccine. This vaccine was designed as a cervical cancer vaccine. But interestingly, the more you look for HPV, the more you see. Okay, so I've touched on the safety stuff. That's the summary article that I hope we can hand out for you guys, just so you've got some summary background of the latest. This is from this year, the latest safety, from last year, data we've got around HPV. Okay. The biggest problem really is fainting, and particularly in school-based programs. So counties, anyone from counties? Yeah. Counties had a real problem earlier this year with their school-based program, and they were hugely experienced public health nurses. And in quite disparate schools, they suddenly got fainting kids. And they faint, they hit their heads, they have head injuries, you know, some of them fit, they're sitting upright, they're not laid down, and so they fit more. And so they had quite a few for a while, and these really experienced public health nurses started getting concerned, you know, and it took us a bit just to have long conversations, restore everybody's confidence, calm everybody down, and interestingly they stopped. Yeah, it's really interesting.
I used to work for the Blood Donor Centre in Waikato, and we used to have exactly the same thing happen, and it was obviously not vaccine related. You know, like you stick a needle in a teenager and they're going to hit the deck, so... Exactly.
But the problem is, when you've got a lot of public hype, and you've given adrenaline because you're worried it was anaphylaxis, and then they feel crap from the adrenaline. Oh, you know, so hold off the adrenaline, be sure it's not anaphylaxis. You know, it's all that sort of stuff. Really hard for them. So syncope, possible skin infections, but I think many people code injection site redness as a skin infection when it's not. So you guys will see this with Tdap, giving multiple Tdap injections. You get really red arms, and they're not particularly sore with them. So, you know, my big counsel to people who ring me and say, this kid's got a whole arm red, I go, how sore are they? And they're usually swinging it around and go, well, it's not a skin infection. You know, if it's a skin infection and it's that extensive, they should be toxic with it. So we do over-treat, you know, reactions and call them skin infections. Now, the other thing that I found really interesting is I hadn't clicked till this year that the poor public health nurses were still asking 12-year-olds, could you be pregnant? And like these poor public health nurses were saying, you know, they're getting really experienced in sexual education. So you don't need to ask. There is no theoretical risk in a non-live vaccine. So it was never trialled on pregnant women. People leave pregnant women out of trials. There is no theoretical risk, but there's now been quite large databases on people who were accidentally vaccinated in pregnancy, and there are no concerns. So, yep. Don't vaccinate a pregnant person, but you do not need to ask every 11 and 12-year-old if they could be pregnant. So we're easing back on that, which I think was quite a barrier to people because it just reiterated the sexual association with the vaccine. You can imagine the kids coming back to their parents and saying, the nurse just asked me if I was pregnant today. It's like, that looks really good. So thank God, I think we've finally this year moved away from that, having to ask them if they're pregnant. It's not a live vaccine, we've got no concerns, okay? So there's a large number of investigations continuing to go on for specific outcomes, okay? Now, obviously, we're always looking for autoimmune conditions. There's a lot of world data around autoimmune conditions in teenagers. Is there any rise in vaccinated versus under-vaccinated? The answer is can't find any, okay? But they're still looking. There was one safety signal in the States around venous VTEs and whether there could be an increase. And there's been quite a lot of studies since that suggest there's not. When you get a whole lot of case studies, you decide, could there be a link? And so then they went and looked at it and can't find an association. Multiple sclerosis is the same, okay? Doesn't look like there's an association. Positional orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, okay? They're still looking at that. The European agency has reviewed it and found no association. They will continue to do more data on this. There's a couple of loud voices in the world talking about this one. And the same with complex regional pain. Okay? Any comments or questions about it? What else is coming through? Okay, so HPV 9, it is going to be a bit more reactogenic than 4. And 4 actually stings. It's actually quite sore. So 9 is just going to be a bit more reactogenic. So you'll see injection site reactions. And you see the usual. It's not really any different from our other vaccines. So the same pattern you use for everything else. You can get a sore arm, you can get a fever, you can get a headache, you know, that's what you're going to see. This is the data around accidental pregnancy, okay, if you ever need it. If you do accidentally vaccinate a pregnant woman, you know, do not be too concerned. You obviously don't finish the vaccination course till they're no longer pregnant, but there really does not appear to be any concerns with vaccinating a pregnant woman. And does it work? Well, obviously, it's a bit early yet to have outcome results with HPV 9. So HPV 9's licensed based on the fact that it acts the same as HPV 4. It's just got more, okay? Now, the big thing that's changed is that younger people get a better immune response to vaccines. At my age, it's all downhill. You know, it's pretty crappy by the time you hit my age. So when you're about 18 months, your peak age. You know, your immune system's fantastic and brilliant and responds really well. And as we get older, our immune system's not so vigorous. So the advantage of giving the vaccine earlier, you get a better immune response. Now, I actually think this is really good because then you can detangle it from sex. Say, look, we want to give it earlier, not because I think your daughter is going to go off and have sex when she's 13, but because you get a better immune response. Because, you know, you have the parents that come back and say, no, my kid doesn't have sex, never going to have sex. She's going to start when she's 45. No problem, all good. But you're still better off having your vaccine when you're 11 because your immune response is better, rather than discussing whether parents really know their kids' sexual activity. So we can offer people aged under 15 years 2 doses instead of 3. This is really cool, and I think hopefully will make a big difference to our vaccination program. All right. Now, what we do with 2 doses is that we want to have a decent gap between the first and the second dose, and because you get more cellular immunity building up between the first and the second dose with a big gap. So you want a gap of really 6 months. So we're saying the interval should be greater than 4 months, and we're saying 0 and 6 months or 0 and 12 months. Okay. Particularly for HPV 18, which is not quite as vigorous in its response as 16. Now, obviously, any vaccines, immunocompromised people are likely to have less of an immune response, so you're going to give them 3 doses. So if you're really seeing anybody under 15 that's, on DMARDs or something nasty for rheumatoid or oncology drugs, you probably want to give them 3 doses. All right, and it's not a lot of organ transplants out there in this age group, but the ones that are, just remember they're likely to be immunocompromised. Okay, yeah.
If you're immune suppressed, would that be called non-methotrexate?
Yeah, now if you look in our handbook now in chapter 3, there's a dose range where we consider above it you're likely to be immunocompromised and below it you're probably not. So it's not bad, it's pretty good in chapter 3 if you have a look. And there's a certain dose we've got of methotrexate. And of course a lot of people are on double whammies. They're on prednisone and something else and a DMARD. So there's quite a nice chapter in the handbook about trying to predict, is this person immunocompromised enough? I mean, I think in a kid under 15, if you're worried, you're better off giving 3 doses. I'm sure PHARMAC would fund, because you're talking about a very small group. Does it work? Well, there's heaps and heaps of data now on the impact of HPV4. This vaccine is the most amazing thing since sliced cheese. It's an incredible vaccine. So, huge reductions. There's 57 published studies over the last few years. There's huge amounts of data now. The Australians and the Danish have reported profound reductions in genital warts. The Australians reckon that they could eradicate genital warts, which is pretty extraordinary. So nobody thought it was ever going to act this well. So it's stunningly amazing. And so even in countries like New Zealand, where we've got fairly mediocre coverage, we're still, as I've shown you, seeing significant reductions. Everywhere using it is seeing declines in cervical dysplasia. And data to date supports long-term effectiveness, but we can't predict 50 years. All we can say is that 10, 11 years out, there's no sign of waning antibodies. Yeah, so long-term effectiveness, we don't know, but what we do know is we're not seeing waning antibodies, and you're seeing amnestic boosts like you do with hepatitis B. When you don't know about your hepatitis B immunity and you give a single dose and you get a big amnestic boost, you see the same with HPV vaccines. So can't answer this, but it's looking good. We've talked about younger women being better, and also there's good evidence of herd immunity. So when there was a lot of conversation about just girls being vaccinated, if we could have got girl rates up high, we would have protected heterosexual guys, but we would not have protected the rest of the community, and particularly men who have sex with men. So that was really a highly vulnerable group that would have missed out. So this way we are protecting more people. Now here's some of the published data on duration of immune protection. There is grey literature, unpublished data up to 10, 11 years, okay? But we've got data showing that it's not dropping, it's being maintained, the antibody levels. Okay? It's a really good acting vaccine. Now, would you use it? Are you anyone vaccinating older women? Has anyone come in and asked for it? That's an interesting question as to what's the gain in vaccinating older women. It's really very tricky, isn't it? Unless you want to delve into the finer points of their sexual history, it's actually really hard to know, have they been fully exposed and responded to all 9 serotypes, or maybe they're still not immune to some. So if they've not been infected at baseline, it still works great. So if you had a woman who was not yet sexually active but was older and was thinking about becoming sexually active, then you'd absolutely use the vaccine. If you had a woman that had pretty limited sexual history, you'd absolutely use the vaccine. And then you probably get decreasing gains after that. There was one study that did suggest post-colposcopy, so women who'd had colposcopy for SIN 2 or 3, that there were some gains in vaccinating. And I think the theory there would go, either it's going to stop you being infected by another type, or if you haven't had a good immune response to the type you're infected with, it'll give you an immune response. So there is some evidence. but then the meta-analysis suggests it's very small. Okay, so it's hard to answer that. So this systematic review suggests there's no evidence of efficacy in pre-exposed women. Okay, so never say never, but it's sort of expensive option for people. But you might see the occasional older woman or older man who wants it too. You know? It's not unreasonable. Okay, so this is just the data around 2 dose, 6 to 12 months apart, 3 doses for immunocompromised. Okay, and there's your references. So we all happy with 2 doses?
Yep.
Fabulous. Just to show you that, I was going to show you this in the WHO stuff as well, but the World Health Organization recommends 2 doses for girls under 15 months because we reviewed the data 2 years ago and it looked pretty good. So that's just in there as well. Okay, HPV-9, there's the pivotal study looking at it. The efficacy against the serotypes in HPV-9 are really high. You can't really complain about a vaccine that's that effective, okay? Fantastic vaccine. It's a really fantastic vaccine. I just find it bizarre that this vaccine's getting such a bad rep when we've got fairly mediocre vaccines like flu and everybody loves it. I'm not against flu. Let's keep our vaccination going, but it's a fairly average vaccine. This is a bloody amazing vaccine and it's getting a crap rep. I mean, it doesn't make any sense, does it? It's really stupid. Yeah, so every time people say to me, I say, I don't understand, it doesn't make sense. The science is not matching what people are saying. Okay, so how are we going to deliver it? Well, at the moment, of course, in year 8, we are delivering HPV to girls. We would like to see it delivered in year 7 to boys and girls, and then you'd have a choice of doing the second dose also in year 7 or the second dose in year 8. So you could do the first dose with the Tdap, so you get them done together, and then the second dose in the same year and then a catch-up in year 8. That's probably the way we will be moving. But yeah, next year that'll be a bit of a switch over, and I think they're talking about doing everyone in year 8 next year. Now, the catch-up concept, now the ministry, bless them, has sort of thrown this out, and it's a really cool idea, but the challenge is how we could do it. So the idea would be if anybody hits 14, in our general practices, we should all have them on recall for if they've missed out on vaccination, okay? Now, it's becoming even more compelling now, because if they hit 15, they need 3 doses. So I think it's a really cool idea if we can cope with our systems to automatically put all 14-year-olds on recall. And then, of course, you need a bit of legwork to then check the NIR to see who's vaccinated and who's not. And that's where the systems problem comes, because I think it's an excellent idea. But, you know, my colleagues would say there's a resource issue here, and there is. There really is it's feasible, but you need to cross-match, or you just send everybody a letter, which is a bit of a waste.
You do the ones that aren't coming up on NIR.
Great. So your practice is doing it. We're trying to do it.
Yeah.
Has anyone else practice doing it?
And they're an incredibly, even now, they're an incredibly hard group to recall.
Yeah.
Really hard.
Oh, yeah.
Numerous phone calls to them.
But you're trying anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
So quite a few practices are trying to recall 14-year-olds. Fantastic. Yeah. No, they are hard. There's no question about it. They're really hard to recall. But at least it's an opportunity to try. And the thing we can put into our recall letters now is if you get in before you're 15, you only need 2 doses.
I've got with the GP practice, we work in the children's ward.
Yeah.
But in GP practice, do you do opportunistic vaccination?
Yeah.
Yeah, we try and do it too, but
Yeah.
you know, we get a lot of resistance.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think in front of our minds always, you know, in most of our practices now, you know, you get the alert coming up saying they're overdue this and this and this. But systematically, it's just harder for teenagers because of with the little kids, we know their data, whereas this one you have to pull it from the NIR. That's the problem.
So it's a good question. I'm working starting with MD. This comes up obviously on the NIR.
Yeah.
Because we also do opportunistic things, and 14-year-olds often come with things that really don't make them terribly sick.
All those broken bones, you could vaccinate them.
Yeah, that's true. Opportunistic. As far as I'm aware, we don't hold HPV as part of our program at the moment.
Okay.
As far as I know, it's certainly not in my fridge.
You know what? You guys are going to see this age group more than we do in general practice.
Yeah. Well, that's my thought. Because we take up to 15 birthday. I know other EPs would obviously take even older.
Yeah.
So that's what maybe.
Yeah.
We should possibly.
Listen, I think that's a great idea because your point over here is that this age group is hard to find.
Hard to find. Whereas
Yeah.
they come to us with injuries and all sorts sorts of studies done.
And you've got them captured.
Yeah, we have
Captured.
them captured.
Tetanus in one arm and HPV.
Well, yeah, I mean that's where we often see the teenagers as your tetanus or injury-related stuff, but also high-risk behaviour.
And actually, in all honesty, we'll get better bangs for our bucks using HPV than tetanus. I love tetanus as well, but actually HPV's the biggie. Good plan. So go tell them we should have HPV in all the fridges. I love it.
My question was, do you keep recalling them so like when they possibly hit 16, 17 and the appearance aren't such an
That's
influence?
when, that's when they come in for them.
They come
when
in.
parents have stopped having
Yeah. You might want another crack at a later date. I mean, you could actually sort of put them at a later date. If you already know, you could then recall them at 20 again or something, you know, because you can put any time you like.
Yeah, no, what we do is we've got a sexual health template, so if they're coming in over 16, that's
Oh, okay.
the questions that you ask, are you immunised? And then if they're not, they can consent themselves.
Oh, that's a good idea.
The problem with the alert is that all the other alerts come up red and the HPV one doesn't come up red until they go over the age that they qualify.
Which is 26 or something. Oh, 20 at the moment, yeah.
20 at the moment.
Yeah.
So,
You're right, that's really dumb.
It is, and we've asked the PHO and PHO people here.
But if you make your own screening template for STIs, you can put it in yourself and then others.
But your point about the straight opportunistic, that's actually a simple, really effective thing. They should come up red.
Mostly they do. The public health nurses are really, really good at getting those kids and taking them. They physically take them to the GPs. They used to hold the vaccine at the youth health clinics, but the coaching policies made that really difficult.
Oops. It got complex, eh? That was really...
So
That was such a...
real shame, real shame.
I'll take that one back too.
Yeah, that would be really good. So we've lost that opportunity.
In this in-between transition time, if someone's started a course of Gardasil and they might qualify for this, do you keep the whole
And just swap over. So you've had a 4, you have 1 or 2 9, whatever. Just pretend they're the same. Okay, you just swap over. But you can't go back and give them a full lot of 9 if they've already started on 4. Well, you could, they'd have to pay. You know. And so anybody from the age of 11 from 1st of January next year is entitled to 3 9s, or 2 9s under 15 or 3 9s 15 and over. And if they've had some 4s, then you just switch over, okay? Yeah. See, I mean, like many of us, have vaccinated my son, you know, so I have to convince him now that I'll top him up. He's resistant. He says he's the only boy in the whole universe that's had to have a cervical cancer vaccine. High on the child abuse list, you know. Says, you know, he's got parents who run computer companies and they get Apple computers and he gets girly vaccines. It's cruel, eh? It's really, it's like you can't choose your environment, you know. Anything else about HPV? Any other thoughts, questions we will call about it?
Are they going to, like, if someone came in at the peak before 4, that they're Gardasil 4, can they come in and ask for the 9?
Yeah, they can pay for it. So if you see from that early stuff, for cervical cancer, you've got about an extra 17% protection. It's just, it would be bloody expensive. That's the only problem. But yeah.
They're really expensive, I can't remember. Because when
Well, you see, 9's not yet on the private market, so I don't know what it's going to be.
we used to have house surgeons, like when HPV first came out, we used to have house surgeons come and get their HPV vaccines, which was quite interesting. You know, it was like maybe
They were watching Young Doctors, that's why. They know what happens in those house surgeon years.
But it was really, and I can't remember how much we bought them in for, but it was really expensive.
Yeah.
And would they need 3 doses or 2?
Well, the thing is, if they want protection against the other 5 serotypes, then you'd need 3 doses. So it's a lot of money for extra serotype protection. I mean, the other way of looking at it is if we got really high coverage rates, we'd get herd immunity and it would solve, wouldn't it? That would be the better way to do it. So if people have got lots of money and are thinking about it, there's no reason why they couldn't have 3 doses of HPV-9. I just don't know what it's going to cost. Yeah. I mean, I guess the other way of looking at it is that we're now normalising this. This is part of the standard immunisation schedule, what we do. This is not new, this is not unique, this is not special. So in one way it's not so bad that you just get on and do it, you know, and you normalise it as what you do, you know. Sometimes when you have really big campaigns, it's almost like you create a problem that wasn't there. So that's one side of it. But yeah, all the little glitches around, you know, how does general practice help with recalling, the idea of opportunistic, you know, clinic-based approaches, I think that'd be fantastic. Because our coverage hasn't been great up till now. Interestingly, coverage rates are higher for Pacifica and Māori and lower for New Zealand European. I mean, clearly New Zealand European kids don't have sex. I mean, I think that's a simple answer. But failing that as an answer, you know, the promotional program has got reverse equity, which is good in a way, but there's still obviously a problem going on there, isn't it? That our promotional campaign's not getting to all parents appropriately and kids. It's going to live on my quotes forevermore, aren't they? Somebody's going to quote me on this one. Right, chickenpox. Okay. Oh, anything else about HPV? I really, really want to reiterate that from a science point of view, it's an amazing vaccine. Isn't hepatitis B incredible? Yeah. Right, well, I think this one's acting very similarly. They're the best vaccines I've ever seen in terms of how they act. Just stunning. So, except for measles vaccine, that's the best. Right, so chickenpox vaccines. Okay, switching headspace. Okay, luckily, this is also a really cool vaccine, so isn't that nice? Not all vaccines are really cool, believe me. These are cool ones. In fact, when I start talking about some of the WHO stuff, I'll talk about vaccines that aren't so cool. Right, so if anybody in the room doesn't know chickenpox, then you've been under a rock, okay? We have chickenpox all the time. I've been seeing quite a bit lately. I think because of the warm winter, isn't it? I'm seeing more chickenpox than flu. There's no flu and there's loads of chickenpox, and skin infections and... Oh, I haven't seen any of that yet. Send it to Wellington. You're seeing it? Yeah. I reckon we just haven't had a winter blip. We're having all the usual summer stuff. Yeah. Oh, it's very weird, isn't it? Okay, so we all know there's lots of chickenpox. Now, obviously, chickenpox is a huge issue in immunocompromised kids. But even so, of the hospitalised, 90% of them are still non-immunocompromised. So even though immunocompromised are the big tragedy, they get chickenpox really badly and it's a disaster, but 90% of hospitalised cases are still healthy, non-immunocompromised. Okay, so it's not the only reason for introducing the chickenpox vaccine. Obviously, long-term disability or death, the rates are actually very low in New Zealand. So this is a vaccine more against hospitalisation and against secondary sequelae. So in New Zealand, skin sepsis. So we're hoping that we'll see a lot of effect against our huge rates of skin sepsis when we get rid of chickenpox. Okay. And once again, as we all know, the deaths and the major disabilities are worse in adults. Okay. Congenital varicella is incredibly rare, but it does happen every now and then. Okay. So we watch out for it. Oh, these are our references, just so you guys know where they, just so you've got the backup there. Right, live attenuated vaccines, different headspace, okay? So it's a live attenuated. There are 2 monovalent licensed in New Zealand, Varivax and Varilrix. The one that's going on the schedule is GSK Varilrix. They're both fine and they both act well. There is a combination MMRV, which is called Priorix Tetra. That's also GSK. That is licensed but not available on the private market. Well, I'll talk to you about that in a moment, but for those who would like it, it's currently not available on the private market, okay? So at the moment it's given in 1 or 2 doses from 9 months of age subcut. That's what Varilrix looks like. It comes in boxes of 10. Oh, that's not me. It comes in boxes of 10, okay? So I'm not sure what that's going to do to our fridge capacity. I just don't want to think about that side of it. It's too hard. Fridges are the bane of our lives. And this is what Priorix Tetra looks like. And I just flagged that because it'll be an interesting conversation about the role of MMRV. Okay, so live attenuated, you have to many of you guys would all have used it on the private market, eh? Yeah. It's actually got quite a lot of usage in the private market. It's something like up to maybe 20% of the birth cohort. So this vaccine of all vaccines has actually got quite a lot of penetration already in the market. We never get rid of fridges, okay? 1 or 2 doses, I'll talk about that with 4 weeks apart, okay? There's no trouble with concomitant delivery with other vaccines, all right? So no problem with giving it with a whole pile of other vaccines. Does it work? Well, actually, against severe disease, it's fantastic, okay? It's amazing. You get a fair bit of breakthrough with a single dose against mild disease, and I think the kids of GPs, everyone I've ever known has always had breakthrough varicella. It's always that. But it's pretty mild. You know, has anyone seen breakthrough varicella? You get a few cases, eh? You know, it's pretty mild, eh? So when it was on the private market and there was this conversation about whether you'd have 1 or 2 doses, 1 dose is really good against severe disease. And I'd say, look, 1 dose is probably fine, and then you normally get wild boosting. But in a country where you don't get wild boosting, you tend to offer 2 doses, okay? 2 doses is highly effective against severe disease, okay? In people over 13 and up, you always need 2 doses. Once again, immune systems aren't so good as you get older, all right? So we do see breakthrough varicella. It's pretty well always attenuated. Has anyone ever seen severe varicella in a vaccinated person? No, you really only see it in immunocompromised. Yeah. Interestingly, the severity doesn't get worse with time post-vaccination. So even if they get breakthrough varicella 10 years later, it's still mild. How effective is it in the immunocompromised? Well, clearly it's not going to be so effective. You can carefully give it to immunocompromised. You just have to figure out how immunocompromised they are. It certainly reduces the disease severity. So mild immunosuppression, you can still use the vaccine, but you'd be very careful in who you are using it in. Okay. Does it last? Well, once again, this vaccine's working on herd immunity, so you can't actually easy answer for an individual how long does it last, okay? Because you've either in a community where you've got a lot of wild disease circulating, so you're getting natural wild boosting, which would extend its use, or you're in a community where you've got good herd immunity. So it's actually really hard to answer duration of protection. So there's a US study that suggests that vaccine efficacy is not dropping very much after 10 years. So it does last for a pretty good length of time, but the problem is, of course, wild disease boosts. So 2 doses probably does last longer. Now, interestingly, it's not like measles. With measles, the 2nd dose is not a booster. You have 1 dose of measles, and if you seroconvert, you're protected for life pretty well. And the 2nd dose is for those who didn't convert the first time. Interestingly, the 2nd dose of varicella also works as a booster, which is why circulating varicella also boosts. Okay, so interesting, eh? No breakthroughs seen after 14 years post 2 doses. So what you see in most countries is they start 1 dose, and then as they get control through the community, they eventually add a 2nd dose. Now that is the strategy New Zealand's taking. So the US have got a universal 2 dose since 2006, but they started 1 dose in 1995. So they introduced their 2nd dose 11 years later. And many countries now, 2nd dose is being introduced 4 or 5 years later. New Zealand's already got it on the table, the discussion about as and when we'd introduce the 2nd dose.
Sorry, Nikki, I can't get it clear in my head. So you talk about that if someone had paid for a varicella vaccine, but you're saying they're getting wild boosts, so they wouldn't come out in chickenpox?
No, so it boosts their immunity.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you've got, no, it's a good question. So you've had a vaccine, you've got reasonable immune response, and then you see chickenpox and your immune response will get even bigger.
Clears up,
Yeah, so it's good.
But then you can also still get breakthrough as well, so that's just
Yeah, well, yeah,
another variant.
you can still get breakthrough as well. Yeah, that's right. Does it work? Yeah, it works fantastically, okay? So there's heaps and heaps and heaps of data. Once again, this is not a new vaccine. New Zealand's late off the market on this one. We're not early off the market. You do not need anyone to tell you this is new or experimental or scary. The states have been using it since 1995, okay? We're just slow learners. So if anyone says that to you, go, well, it's taken us far too long to get there. And it works. So there's a bit of the US data. 1 dose is 95, 2 and 2006 or 2007. I'm not sure which. I've got one of my data wrong. Huge reduction in the vaccinated age group. Now there is a real question about if you vaccinate a whole lot of kids and you get waning immunity, will you see more varicella in older ages? That was one of the big questions, okay? Now the Americans have pretty well answered that and shown that overall they get dramatic reduction in disease, and they've seen a very small shift in epidemiology to adolescents, okay? So overall, there's a theoretical concern you can shift the burden to older age groups. It's not seen, it's seen a little bit, okay? Huge reductions in hospitalisations, huge reductions in mortality, declines in all age groups, including those too young to be vaccinated, so herd immunity. Heaps of other regions have got their way before us, okay? Heaps and heaps.